Welcome to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast, presented by Vox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin.
Stephon Gilmore go to the Patriots. Now they let Mike Gillislee go to the Patriots. Are they now just the farm club within their own division?
Greg.
He's one of these faux leading women. It's like, that's not Angelina Jolie or Jennifer Aniston. It's some girl that I would see at the Circle K. That's kind of Alshon Jeffrey.
And Ryan.
There is absolutely no reason why O.J. Howard should be drafted before Cameron Brate.
What is up, Skull King Nation? This is Greg Talcott coming to you here during training camp. With everything just getting started, we thought we would go around the league pretty much every day and generally cover two teams, one from the AFC, one from the NFC, and just kind of going down by division. Looking at those teams, both what their prospects are for the year, and also how some key players from their roster may fare this season, and what fantasy football players should be looking for draft-wise as it pertains to these players. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk about the AFC North to start, and we'll talk about the Baltimore Ravens. It's a real clever process I'm using, which is alphabetical order, which within each division. So that's how we're starting with Baltimore. It's not have anything to do with a massive fan base. So for the Ravens, looking at them, I don't really see much changing this year from last year, to be honest. And I actually have them finishing 8-8 or anywhere around there, 7-9, 9-7. I don't see them winning 10 games. I could see them winning, though, potentially only 6. Reason being is they're still a solid defense, but offensively they really did nothing to improve themselves. Adding Jeremy Maclin at this stage in his career, when your quarterback is Joe Flacco, is only going to produce so much as far as results are concerned. And on the draft, they focused principally on defense and took no skill players. So you don't see anything really changing offensively for the Ravens to give them a great outlook this year. I think the Ravens remain a top 10 defense, probably more like maybe even top 8 defense. So I think from a fantasy perspective, the most realistic best chance you have at weekly contributions is actually the Ravens defense once we get into this roster. I think before today, some people would have had Kenneth Dixon as a potential running back too. And just for note, I'm always talking from a PPR perspective in these leagues. I really don't talk about standard at all. So this is just a PPR format that I'm talking about right here. But most people, I think, coming into today would have had Kenneth Dixon as a potential running back too. Certainly coming back off of a 4-game suspension at the start of the year, you would have had to have an adequate replacement to start, and so Danny Woodhead would have made a nice handcuff. Well, as it turns out, Kenneth Dixon isn't coming back after those 4 games because he had knee surgery. His meniscus is going to keep him out for the season. So he'll be serving those 4 games if he plays next year. That leaves you now with Terrence West, who certainly is going to be getting quite a bit of action with Dixon out. But Terrence West is not a great running back. He's barely a threat if you're lucky to hit 1,000 yards. I mean, he would have way overperformed anything up to this point in his career if he hits 1,000 yards. He's not a guy who's going to get a ton of balls or a ton of touchdowns. Just think about this team and the number of opportunities he's even going to get. I mean, I think in the PPR format, Danny Woodhead is the best option at running back. And if you're going to take somebody in the draft, you would take Woodhead. I don't see taking Terrence West for depth as maybe a 4th running back, I could see. But I think Danny Woodhead is the one who has the most ability to contribute for a fantasy owner this season. The rest of their backfield, really is not impressive. And from West's perspective, he could lose carries on the goal line to Talcott, who's, they're basically the same size guy. Talcott, a little bit taller guy, coming about the same weight, but maybe he gets goal line carries, and that further reduces Woodhead's potential. Wide receiver wise, at best you got a wide receiver 4 in Mike Wallace, and realistically, he should be bench depth, not every week starting material. Part of that is a result of his inconsistency and inability to produce. Another part of that would just be who he's playing with at quarterback, and that's Joe Flacco. So you cannot expect a ton, out of Wallace, and I think the addition of Macklin is only going to trim into what were his relatively mediocre stats last year. Macklin, I think, does have some potential. Also, you have two guys that at best are going to be a wide receiver 4. They're not going to crack the number 3 level, and again, they're best served from a depth perspective on your bench. In a lot of leagues, maybe these guys don't even get drafted. Maybe one gets drafted. I think people would probably take Wallace first, but there is nothing in that passing game that is really encouraging from both a Ravens fan perspective, let alone a fantasy football perspective. And that gets us to the quarterback, and an award that I'm going to be initiating today, which we're going to try to give to each team as we go through these reviews. I don't know if it's actually going to be possible to find a player that always meets the criteria, but what we're looking for is a player who holds a key position on a team, so a starter, a position of value like quarterback, and that person may or may not be overpaid. In this case, Joe Flacco meets those qualifications. Now, Joe does have Super Bowl success, but from a statistical standpoint, Joe has not set the world on fire. And from a fantasy football standpoint, that's really what matters for the purposes of this show. So getting the award for the Lena Dunham least desirable person to take in your fantasy football draft from the Baltimore Ravens is Joe Flacco. When I say least desirable being Lena Dunham, imagine you could take any beautiful actress you wanted to a Caribbean island for a romantic weekend. Who would you choose? I don't know what your tastes are, and I don't want to presume. But let me assume this, it's not going to be Lena Dunham, at least if you possess eyes and or ears. So Lena Dunham is our least desirable player to draft from a fantasy football perspective, Joe Flacco being the winner of the Lena Dunham Award. In Joe's miserable career, he has had just 2 seasons where he produced more than 25 touchdowns in a season with a career high of 27. Yet, he has 5 seasons under 20 touchdowns, 3 of those being in the teens. Now, somebody's going to say, wait, Greg, one of those seasons he was injured. Yeah, but if you really map it out, he would have still gotten to like 20, maybe 21 if we're being generous. So either way, horrible production offensively from Flacco, and you can't expect at this point in his career it's suddenly going to click, right? So not a lot of great options fantasy football-wise on our first team, the Baltimore Ravens. Though if Tim White from ASU does happen to make that team, look at him as somebody who, not necessarily from a fantasy football perspective, but from a fan perspective, could be an exciting player. He's a lot faster in the games and looks a lot better in games and in tape against quality opponents than he necessarily did at his pro day. So don't know if he's going to make the team or not. He wasn't drafted, but if he does, I think that could be one exciting player on the Ravens. Moving on now to the NFC North, and we're going to talk about my formerly favorite team, the Chicago Bears. So many of you know my stance on the Bears and kind of how I feel about the years of mediocrity and absolutely the worst owners in professional football, some of the worst owners in professional sports. The Bears coming into this draft, as I projected before the draft, we're going to do something stupid to get Mitch Trubisky and draft Mitch Trubisky, and they did. They traded up for him, and I had a full-scale meltdown, which I'm still not completely recovered from. I will make a modest retraction, not really a retraction, but I'm going to soften my stance a little bit. If we look at it from a trade perspective and what the Bears gave up to get Trubisky, which they just swapped and moved up one space, so really overall they gave up 2/3 and a 4th round pick for Trubisky. That's really what they gave up, right? So even if he's terrible, he cost you 2/3 and a 4th. What did we give up for Jay Cutler? Well, we gave up 2 firsts, a 3rd, and our starting quarterback in Kyle Orton. And we got Jay Cutler and a 5th round pick. And Jay Cutler was terrible. So no matter what, it's cheaper, by no means sets the Bears back as much as the Cutler debacle did, which they are now just beginning to recover from. So slight, the trade is not as bad when you look at it on the total cost, especially when you consider historically the Bears make horrendous draft picks regardless of the pick they have. So whatever picks they gave up, those guys probably would have sucked anyway. So, we're going to get over that one, right? Now, if we look at it compared to what the Rams had to give up to get Goff, what the Eagles gave up to get Wentz, this is infinitely cheaper to get Trubisky. Now, that is the interesting thing. I defy anybody to watch these three players throw a football the way I have and not come to the same conclusion. If you watch Jared Goff throw a football, both in the games last year, or if you see him, work out combine type stuff, if you watch Wentz, they both have flaws in their mechanics. Goff has an elongated delivery, which is terrible. We won't get into his poise in the pocket, but just his delivery is not something that I think looks great. And Wentz has an obvious hitch in his delivery, which could cost him issues throughout his career as far as arm health goes. If you watch Trubisky throw the ball, he looks better than the other two guys. He looks the part. You're just watching a guy throw a football. Trubisky looks the part and looks like the better pick. Now, my knock on Trubisky, he played for a school where football is a secondary sport in North Carolina. He wasn't good enough to unseat the guy who came before him, which is why he only started one season. And in that season, it was only good for North Carolina standards, which was like 8-5. Now, his touchdown to interception ratio, he was accurate, which is something that's important to the Bears coming out of the Cutler scenario that they were just in. But it's a stretch to say that resume, that limited of a resume, is going to translate into wins in a division that has Aaron Rodgers. As I've always said, you have to have the best quarterback in your division in order to win that division, to have the best chance of winning that division. And winning the division is your best chance of ever winning a Super Bowl. And the Bears never have that quarterback. And how often do the Bears win the division? Incredibly rarely, right? So I don't know that Trubisky's the guy. If they were to trade up for somebody, I wish it would have been Watson, because he was the only person that showed, in reality, competing on the biggest stage against the best talent he could possibly compete against, and winning and looking awesome while doing it, right? So the Bears, anyway, that's where we stand. Still pissed at the Bears. Point this out, the number one selling jersey in the entire state of Illinois is nobody from the Bears. It's Tom Brady. So, hey, how does that feel, right? I mean, that can't, I'm not the only one, right? I mean, you can't even sell, like, it's not even like a Forte jersey or like some kind of throwback that was on like the clearance rack. It's Tom Brady, right? Who knew? So Bears this season, I see them, I'm being generous, I'm going 7-9. I can see them winning 3 games. Yeah, that's fine. I think they're going to be a little bit better. I see them going 7-9, most of those wins coming in the second half. I think your fantasy stud, bar none, Jordan Howard, he is a top 15 pick this year. There's no way he's out of the top 15 unless you are in a league of people who are just really slow upstairs. PPR or not, Howard is just going to be the workhorse for the Bears. Watching the way that guy ran last year, there's a lot to be hopeful for as far as his performance and his abilities going forward. Granted, he's a Bear player. We've all learned in the past, don't judge on a small sample size, but nonetheless, he's worth taking within the top 15. Now, that does leave the room for disappointment if he does underperform. So that's a good year, but doesn't do as well as he did last year, given changes you have at, quarterback and all this that's going on around him. Maybe there's a potential for disappointment, but I would go with Jordan Howard, top 15, pretty easy choice. Other viable draft candidate is going to be Cameron Meredith, is I think a wide receiver 3. The Bears signed a bunch of guys in the offseason, like a Kendall Wright, a Victor Cruz, right? But I'm not going to draft those guys. Those are waiver wire pickups. You're not going to take a flyer on them. Cameron Meredith is right now the guy who's most likely to be catching, any kind of passes that are coming out of the hot arm of Beaker to start the season. And so the Bears defensively, maybe stream-worthy defense. Certainly nothing you're going to draft at all. I mean, I'm a big fan of just streaming defenses and not drafting one. The Bears certainly would not even fall into contemplation for drafting, but they are a stream-worthy defense, especially depending on the matchup that you have this season. And that gets us to, this is going to be the Indeed.com, Job of the Week award. And this goes to Mike Glennon, as I refer to him as Beaker, who is the only guy I know actually to sign a big contract this offseason, and he's still looking for work because the Bears drafted Trubisky. The Bears plan on playing Trubisky, and I would say that the over-under on Trubisky playing is the bye week. So the Bears have a bye in week 8, which the only way Glennon has a job after the bye week is if he has them in playoff contention. Probably not going to happen. Or nothing else, right? If they're not in playoff contention, let alone if he's been injured, I think you are going to see Trubisky play the second half of the season. I think he's going to get the baptism by fire with Green Bay right out of the gate. Glennon's going to get a game against Green Bay. Trubisky's going to get a game against Green Bay. It might be his first start. Might be a tough first start. But I think Trubisky plays the second half of the season for the Bears. I think most of their wins come in the second half. That's how I have them going 7-9. Not saying I'm a Trubisky believer. I'm just saying there is a slight chance that he could be better than Cade McNown. It's a slight chance. But Bear fans, we could be seeing this repeat of this process and drafting more quarterbacks again in the future. So, that's basically all I got today, guys. If you have questions, if you're watching this, feel free to type them in or just send them to us. I'd be happy to address those whenever I do the broadcast, the next day. And every opinion in here is mine. This is not like the entire staff got behind my picks. These are just kind of my thoughts. So, if I'm wrong, don't blame Ryan. If I'm right, please give Ryan credit for having me on the staff, and otherwise, I'll check you guys out tomorrow. Have a good one.
Hey, Skull King Nation, thank you for listening to the Skull King Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.